With the two most obvious options in Movsar Evloev and Lerone Murphy sitting on the sidelines waiting for their opportunity, the UFC is leaning on Diego Lopes and his popularity for Alexander Volkanovski's first title defense in his second reign as featherweight champion. Many, including myself, were underwhelmed by this announcement, but it is what it is. We know Diego Lopes will bring the heat and the entertainment, so it should pass, especially for Volkanovski and defending the crown on home turf. The co-main event was supposed to feature a high-level middleweight matchup, which was likely going to be scheduled for 5 rounds between Sean Strickland and Anthony Fluffy Hernandez. But once Sean Strickland saw the tax rates, he goes, nah, I'm good. Give me the UFC Houston main event in February instead. Now the co-main event honors go to Dan Hooker and Benoit Saint Denis, which is sure to provide some violence regardless. Elsewhere on the card is the return of Tuivasa. The only thing worse than his 5-fight losing streak right now is the sport that he decided to invest in during his time off. Apparently Power Slap is doing numbers, so who knows where this could go. The UFC is also trying to sneak in 4 Road to UFC fights to start off this card to make up this 14-fight UFC 325 card, but it's a card that takes place in Australia. Just like Sean Strickland, who really wants to pay all those taxes to fight all the way across the world. So we have to be thankful for the card that they were still able to put together for the second numbered card for the Paramount era in 2026. It's that time again, time to lock in. A quick shout out once again to everybody that joined up for the live streams on Tuesday and Friday, and then the watch party buddies as well. Again, just another reminder that every Tuesday from 8 p.m. Eastern to 9 p.m. Eastern, I'm live on the channel here talking about the upcoming fights and any relevant news. And then on Fridays, 1 p.m. Eastern, we go live for the Fight Day live chat to talk any last minute things for the card. But again, there's a ton of other great content on the channel here, so make sure you hit that subscribe and help me hit that 10,000 subscriber mark that I believe I deserve, obviously, but it is up to you guys to hit that subscribe if you haven't already. Please do. All right, let's get right into this 14-fight card. And as I said at the top of the podcast, the UFC is trying to sneak in 4 of the Road to UFC finales onto this card, and we start off, I believe, in the flyweight division with a matchup here between Aaron Tao and Namzrai Batbayar. You got plus 105 on the Maori fighter and minus 125 on the Mongolian. Now, starting off on the Tao side of things, who's riding a 3-fight winning streak now, especially after that performance that he had against Eliza Smith on the Contender series at 135 pounds, he probably decided, hey, I can cut the weight down to 125 pounds. He's only 5'4" with the 66-inch reach, and it seems to be working out for him thus far. Although the level of competition in his first 2 matchups, not the highest of levels, so he was able to finish those guys. And then he faced some adversity in his second Road to UFC matchup against Shuai Yin. I believe that was the guy's name. But that was a close fight. You know, that was a fight where Tao did some good work in the first round, threatening with his takedowns, trying to get to his power punching game as well. But Yin shut most of that down, but still lost that round. The second round, very close, and even though the damage was showing on Yin's face, I thought he was doing a good job of landing big shots of his own and probably swinging the momentum in his favor, and that was probably going to be a round that he would have won. Unfortunately, he ended up getting knocked down by Tao, and Tao was able to get that back into his favor. Thus, he won rounds 1 and 2. Start to fall off in round 3. Yin put the blasters on, and he was able to land some big damage, but unfortunately, he couldn't finish Tao. Tao is a city kickboxing representative who I think a lot of that love has kind of rubbed off onto some of his betting lines and even kind of exaggerated his talent level. I don't think he's that great. He's a good fighter, don't get me wrong. He loves to mix it up. He loves to provide some chaos and really drag his opponents into wars. But as we see, obviously in that Elijah Smith fight, and as we're going to continue to see when he fights tougher competition, it's going to be harder for him to find much success. If he can't knock them out and if he can't get to his wrestling, things are going to start to go sideways for him. He's going up against Namzrai Batbayar, who's a Mongolian beast, with his only loss coming at the hands of Nyamjagal Tumendemberel, who's obviously in the UFC and doing some good work of his own. But Batbayar is on a solid winning streak ever since that loss. 2 of those wins coming under the Road to UFC banner. The first getting that knockout victory against Yamauchi, and then last time around pulling off an upset against a guy that I thought was a more talented striker in Agulali. We saw Batbayar in the Yamauchi fight try to lean on his grappling in the first round, which is his main focus in matchups, dragging opponents to the ground, smashing them from that top position, and getting these finishes. But he was struggling to get that dominant position against Yamauchi, and it seemed like the momentum was starting to shift the other way. To begin the second round, Batbayar let go of the grappling game plan and start to engage in a war, throwing big shots, and that eventually led to him getting that knockout victory over Yamauchi in the opening seconds of round 2. In the Agulali fight, it seemed like he kind of ditched the grappling once again and let his power do the talking, and he eventually caught Agulali with a big shot and eventually got that club and sub opportunity to get the finish there. He's very skilled. He's very strong as well when he gets to his grappling. He chain wrestles well, and his cardio looks pretty good too. This is a matchup here against Aaron Tao, where I believe Batbayar not being intimidated by Tao, being willing to exchange in the pocket and have power of his own, and then having the grappling advantage as well, makes me believe that the Mongolian fighter is the clear side here. Even at minus 125, I know Batbayar may not have the training camp and the coaches that Tao has, or even the hype that Tao has, but Batbayar has been showing in recent fights that he is the real deal, and I think this is a perfect matchup for him to really wear Tao down and possibly find a second or third round finish. So to kick things off here, I think we see Batbayar win the flyweight Road to UFC tournament. All right, next up, we got a bantamweight finale here for the Road to UFC between Sulangrangbo, coming in at minus 245, going up against City Kickboxing representative Lawrence Liu, who comes in at plus 215. Now, starting off on the Sulangrangbo side, I'm going to go with Su. You know what I mean? Breaking down his first Road to UFC fight, I'm like, this guy reminds me of Sumudarji, right? A guy that strikes very well. Obviously, their name starts with Su, so, there must be some sort of connection there. And John Gooden on the broadcast ended up confirming that, as Sulangrangbo is a cousin of Sumudarji. So for the ease of this breakdown, I'm going to just go with Su. I'm not going to go with the whole name here for the guy. He's a very talented striker. He's only 20 years old. A lot of his losses came much earlier in his career, but he is a guy that does a great job in terms of implementing his footwork, his movement, his range management is very high level as well. And I think that helps him lean on that striking style and staying away from the grappling of his opponents. I thought that was on clear display last time around against Kai Xiong, a guy that I thought was a better mixed martial artist, at least a more well-rounded mixed martial artist. But Xiong could not get in on a takedown to save his life. Xiong moved laterally a lot, stayed on the outside, tried to time takedowns, but he couldn't sniff a good enough takedown attempt to really expose that side of Su's game. But you have to give credit to Su in terms of improving that side of his game. We know he's a striker. We know he wants to let his hands go, but he has to keep fights standing if he really wants to have success. And I think we saw that on full display against Xiong. Now, he's only 20 years old, but this guy's been fighting since a kid, right? Since he was a child, pretty much. There's footage, if you look hard enough, that you can find him from his earlier days, as a wee little lad going out there and fighting guys and really fucking them up too. So, like, he does a good job in terms of utilizing that experience from earlier on in his career to now, where he's fighting tougher and tougher competition. Now it's all about continuing to accrue that experience against tougher competition so that he can be more effective as he gets into his mid-20s and his late 20s, and may even go down as a really good fighter if he can continue the trend and trajectory that he's currently on. Now he's going up against Lawrence Liu, who's on a 4-fight winning streak right now. His only loss came against former Contender Series alum Anthony Drillich, a fight that he ended up losing by split decision. It was a very close fight, but it kind of showed some of the holes in Liu's game, and we've seen some of those holes in Liu's game even in his 2 Road to UFC fights. The first one, we saw him try to lean on his background, which is that striking, but he couldn't really get the better of Zhang. So then he relied on his grappling in the second and third rounds to really grind that fight out, and he was able to get the win there. He tried to use the grappling again against his last opponent, but he was really getting touched up on the feet in the first round. But then in the second round, he managed to corral his opponent very well up against the cage, and he unleashed with a nasty combination that put his opponent down and out. This 29-year-old represents city kickboxing, and I think a lot of that, similar to Aaron Tao from the last matchup, is rubbing off on the betting lines sometimes. Maybe not so much this much because people see the discrepancy in skills, but he's a little bit, well-rounded. I'd say he's a better striker than a grappler, but it really comes down to the type of opponent he has ahead of him. This weekend, he goes up against Sulangrangbo, who I think is a better striker. Obviously Liu, 9 years his elder, but Su looks a little bit more crisp. He moves his feet a little bit better. He crashes the pocket a little better. He's a little bit straighter with his shots. He might even be a little bit faster. I wouldn't be surprised to see Liu look to actually drag this fight to the ground, and I think he's going to struggle to do so. He might be stronger. He might have a little bit more of that man strength, if that's what you want to call it. But I think he's going to struggle to get too much control time here. And I think that will allow Su to continuously counter Liu whenever Liu tries to crash the pocket or engage in the grappling realm. And I think we see Su just piece him up, touch him up. I'm not 100% sure if he'll actually be able to muster up a finish here. But I think that we see Su touch him up, get the decision win, and I don't mind him at this minus 245 line either. All right, now for the featherweight finale of the road to UFC, we got Teixeira Nakamura coming in at plus 105, going up against Sebastian Szalay, who comes in at minus 125. Now, I'll start off on the Nakamura side of things, who's giving me Shamil Musayev vibes, right? A guy with questionable takedown defense from earlier in his career who's significantly improved that aspect of his game, and a nasty striker as well. Now, Musayev might be, much better than Nakamura, but I feel like there are some shades of Musayev in Nakamura's game, and you see it when he really starts to get into his striking groove. Now, his first RTU matchup, he went up against a tough Korean grappler, a guy that I thought would be able to stifle Nakamura and take advantage of some of the grappling shortcomings that I saw earlier on in Nakamura's career. But Park could not sniff a takedown against Nakamura. Nakamura utilized good range management, good footwork, cut the angles, countered effectively, and had a very good sprawl. And that eventually led to a nasty knee that he uncorked midway through the second round to get that knockout victory. That led him to a very fun striking battle against Kai Wen Lee, who has, I believe, previously made it to the finale of the road to UFC, but he went up against a very tough Nakamura. And Lee did have some good success in that first round, hurt Nakamura, but was unable to really secure takedowns or get good control from that top position. But then in the second and third rounds, Nakamura did a great job in terms of rallying back. He got a 10-8 on one of the scorecards in the second round against Lee, showcasing his striking, really just torching Lee and showcasing he's the slicker and faster striker and the better striker at the end of the day. Nakamura is very fun to watch, and a guy that has a ton of potential if he can continue working on his defensive grappling, maybe shore up the striking defense just a tad, but in terms of his ability to just be a sniper and land with the power and finishing ability he's very fun to watch. Now, his last matchup was his second time, I believe, going into the third round, and this was his first time winning a fight by decision as well. His cardio looks good enough, and his ability to battle back from adversity too looked very good, and I think that's going to help him as he continues to accrue experience fighting stiffer competition. Now, he's going up against the Aussie here, Sebastian Szalay, who looks like a very well-rounded prospect and a guy that I kind of called early on in the RTU tournament as maybe a bit of a dark horse to win the entire thing. He did a great job against Yizha, stuffing 11 of his 13 takedown attempts and then butchering him on the feet to win a decision. And then last time around, he only needed 47 seconds to dispose of Changmin Yoon, I believe the guy's name was, clipping him with a big shot, following up with some ground and pound, and eventually getting the win there. Szalay is very well trained, has a ton of good experience against higher levels of competition. The record of his last 7 opponents, the combined record of his last 7 opponents is 53-11, with 4 of those fighters being undefeated at the time of fighting them. He has good fight IQ, good ability to crash the pocket and land effective strikes. He can mix in the grappling if he needs to as well. He seems very well rounded. In one of my breakdowns, I kind of compared him to JDM. Maybe not as good of a striker as JDM, but definitely a better grappler. So that kind of makes him a little bit more well-rounded. And I think that has definitely helped him in his last couple of fights. I've also rated Australia and New Zealand as kind of a little bit lower level regional scene compared to some other spots in the world. But he did fight the best that region had to offer on his way to the road to UFC. So you have to credit him for passing all those tests and still being as successful as he has been. Now here against Nakamura, this is a fun fight. Probably the highest level matchup that you can get on this entire season of Road to UFC. It's going to be the slick power striking of Nakamura against the well-roundedness of Szalay. I've seen this line jump over the last 48 hours from one side to the other. I saw Nakamura as a -125 favorite. Now he finds himself as a +105 dog. So even action coming in on either side. Personally, I'd like to wait out fight week and see how this one starts to pan out, if it seems to settle a certain way or the other. But I find myself time and time again coming to the Japanese side of things here. I feel like Nakamura's striking could really cause Szalay some issues here. If Nakamura's defensive grappling holds up and he's able to kind of thwart the well-roundedness of Szalay, with Szalay mixing in some power punches in front of some takedown attempts, if Nakamura can fend that off or counter that forward pressure of Szalay with his sniper-like striking, I think he can really hurt Szalay and maybe even come through with a knockout here. So if this line continues to climb in favor of Szalay and we get a better underdog price on Nakamura, I might end up pulling the trigger there, but both these guys deserve to be in the UFC. I hope, I don't think it's going to happen, but I hope that the UFC ends up signing both of these guys after a competitive 15-minute battle. But in terms of an actual prediction, I'm going to have to go with the Japanese side here. I think Nakamura lands that counter repeatedly, starts to break Szalay down, and then I think that opens up a spot where Nakamura can counter him once again and put him down and out. So I'm going to go with Keiichiro Nakamura to win this fight by knockout. All right, now we go over to the lightweight Road to UFC finale, as we got Sang-Wook Kim coming in at +145, going up against Dom Marfan, who comes in at -170. Now we'll start off on the Kim side of things, who is now on a 4-fight winning streak after falling short on the previous season of the Road to UFC at the hands of Rongju. That night, he could not get to his grappling advantage, and he ended up getting torched on the feet by Rongju for 15 minutes, allowing Rongju to win that fight on the scorecards. But we did see Kim pick up 2 wins on the regional scene before getting another opportunity on Road to UFC, and he's come through with back-to-back round 2 finishes. His first fight in this tournament came up against another grappler who was having a lot of success against Kim for about a round and a half, where at 4 it was obvious that the gas tank issues and cardio mismanagement really caused Kamiya some issues. That slowed him down. That allowed Kim to get a reversal, get some big shots off, and get a finish from that crucifix position. The next matchup for Kim was a little bit easier. It was a pick'em on the betting lines, but once the fight started, it seemed like Kim was the side, as he eventually worked his way into a body lock, got a takedown, got a few submission attempts off in the first round, but it was clear in the second round that his opponent was starting to slow down. That wear and tear was starting to catch up to him, and Kim was eventually able to get that submission finish to force the tap. Kim is a very talented grappler. He does a great job with his long limbs as well. He has a 71-inch reach, and he utilizes that front choke series very well. He utilizes the body lock very well, and he has some sneaky takedowns where he's able to eventually get to positions where he feels a little bit more comfortable. He does a good job in terms of taking the back of his opponent too, and I think he's one of those sturdier guys to deal with in the grappling realm. Speaking of sturdy in the grappling realm, how about 25-year-old Dom Marfan, who's on a 4-fight winning streak, his only 2 pro losses coming at the hands of a man that fights later on in this card, killing Salkilld. Dalmar Fan has been an underdog in both of his road to UFC fights so far, and he's kind of dominated both of them. The first one he came in as a plus 500 underdog, and he won the first 2 rounds with his usual grapple-heavy style. He started to slow down a little bit in the third and ate some damage, but luckily saw the scorecards and was able to still get his hand raised. Last time around, he had tremendous success against Park, where he was able to get in on his takedowns, get that top position, get the back, threaten with a few submission attempts, and land that consistent ground and pound. He loves to land elbows. He loves to land ground and pound to stay busy so that the referee's never encouraged to try to step in and stand these guys back up. Fan at times has mismanaged his gas tank, but he looked really good in his last matchup, especially the fact that it went 15 minutes and he controlled the majority of it. Now, there were some instances where he got reversed or even got his own back taken, but I love the little things that he does to stay safe in those spots. He attacks his opponent's hooks so that they can't get that full control. And even when they end up attacking with a choke, he knows the right moments to explode and turn and reverse and get on top of his opponents. He seems very well trained, especially when he's on the mat, and he doesn't often find himself in bad spots, but when he does, he knows exactly when to get out of those bad spots and what to do to get out of those bad spots. His striking, still a work in progress. There's a lot of work to be doing there, but he usually knows how to do a good enough job in terms of crashing the pocket, engaging in the clinch, and from there he gets that double underhook position, the body lock, and he has inside trips, outside trips, he has some throws, or even finds a way to rotate to the back of his opponent and then just dragging them to the ground by sinking in a hook and getting that grapevine on one of his opponent's legs. He's very skilled, and he's only 25 years old and a very tough guy to deal with in the grappling realm. Now, against Kim here, Kim, obviously a talented grappler in his own right, but I feel like Fan has a little extra in the tank to give and does a little bit more in terms of working out of bad positions. And I think he'll have more success maintaining that top control or even getting the back of Kim and really wearing him down from there. At minus 170, I think this is a great spot to take a shot on Fan to complete his road to UFC journey and make it to the UFC. Both guys don't really often leave much in terms of striking here, so I think most of this will take place in the grappling realm, and from there I really think Fan will do a good enough job in terms of subduing Kim, keeping him on the defensive. There could be some success for Kim in deep water in the third round, but I believe in Fan's submission defense and grappling defense enough that he won't end up getting finished here. So I like Fan. I like him at minus 170, and I think he ends up grinding this out and winning it on the scorecards. All right, that now brings us to our first official UFC bout of the evening, and it takes place in the featherweight division as we have tough finalist Ofli coming in at plus 165, going up against recent road to UFC winner Yizha. Now, starting off on the Ofli side of things, he did stumble in his UFC debut against Mohamed Naimov, who kept him on the defensive and showcased a grinding game from the clinch to the takedowns and that top control. But Ofli was in it for most of that fight, just couldn't really get off on much offense of his own. Prior to that, he had actually lost to Myron Santos in the Ultimate Fighter 32 finale. He couldn't deal with the size advantage and the strength of Santos, nor the striking of Santos, which eventually led to Ofli getting knocked out in the second round. But Ofli did showcase his BJJ black belt and grappling skills last time around against Ricardo Ramos, who dove for a knee bar right pretty much at the beginning of the fight, and Ofli rolled and showcased good submission defense, and eventually worked to a position where he was able to get the back of Ramos, and from there he was quickly threatening with rear naked chokes and eventually found the position to get the choke. He squeezed and got the tap from the UFC veteran. That was big for the confidence of Ofli, who was still looking for his first UFC win at the time, and showcased that he does have potential and why he was so highly touted on the Ultimate Fighter. He beat some pretty tough guys on the Ultimate Fighter, including Nathan Fletcher and even Rudy Roots, who could be in the UFC with the wrestling that he normally brings to the table. Ofli kind of fights like a knockoff Volkanovski in the fact that he throws, maybe not Volkanovski, more of a Chad Mendes, like a short grappling wrestler, a guy that likes to throw a lot of wide winging hooks, but has a good wrestling game, has good BJJ as well. And I think we saw that on display in his last matchup against Ricardo Ramos. Now he's going up against Yizha, who is also a grappler and has a tremendous amount of experience with 31 fights under his belt. But he only needed, 30-something seconds or 20-something seconds to get rid of Weston Wilson last time around. It was hilarious watching him land the overhand left repeatedly, and Wilson had no answer for it. And one of those finally ended up planting Wilson on his ass. Yizha followed up with a lot more big shots and quickly got him out of there. But when you remember that Yizha was a minus 1,200 favorite going into that fight, that's exactly what you're supposed to do, and thankfully he was able to do it. That allowed him to bounce back after his UFC debut loss at the hands of Gabriel Santos, who showed no respect for Yizha. He outstruck him on the feet, he outgrappled him, kept Yizha on his back, especially in deeper water, and showcased his dominance without much issue in return. Yizha is normally a smothering grappler who likes to establish his top control, establish his BJJ, and really keep his opponents on their back, where he often does his best work. He's a mediocre striker at best. I think he seems a little bit lost on the feet unless he sees the openings like he did against Weston Wilson, where he was constantly landing his big shots. But more often than not, we see him shooting takedowns, we see him trying to get that top position, and we see him trying to just grind those positions out. He's finished 20 of those of his 26 wins, with 14 of them coming by submission. So it's obvious what he's obviously looking for in most of his matchups. Now he's going up against Ofli here, who will definitely have something to say in the grappling realm. I don't think that Yizha is as aggressive nor dominant of a grappler as Naimov is, so I think we'll see Ofli actually have some success here, shucking off some of the takedowns of Yizha, or even having some success of his own. If Yizha can't have that success, we often see him start to get deterred, start to break a little bit, and I think that's where Ofli can start to have success of his own. On the feet, neither guy, high level, but I feel you can still lean on the aggressiveness and explosivity of Ofli to give him the edge in that realm, where he can land some big shots of his own and maybe even mix in some takedowns behind it. I was kind of surprised to see him at plus 165. I'm not sure if that has to do with Yizha's impressive finish last time around, even though he was a minus 1,200 favorite, or if people are still weighing those two losses that Ofli had recently too much in this matchup. I think Ofli is the better, well-rounded fighter here. Yizha could have some success with some of his grappling, but as long as Ofli doesn't get finished early here, I think he can really start to turn the tide of this fight and really have success down the stretch. So I'm going to go Ofli. I think he pulls off the upset here. I think he wins by decision, and I think plus 165 is more than good enough to take a shot on the Turkish Australian fighter. I believe he's Turkish Aussie. Yeah, Turkish Aussie, I guess is what we're going to call him. So give me Ofli by decision. Moving over to the next matchup here in the welterweight division, we got Jonathan Micallef coming in at minus 130, going up against Oban Elliott, who comes in at plus 110. Now, this was a matchup that was actually scheduled for back in September, but I believe a fight day illness to Elliott pulled him out of the matchup, and now they're being rescheduled for this weekend. Now, Micallef is coming off of a solid debut victory over Kevin Jousset. Solid in the fact that, it didn't really look like he struggled through the first two rounds, but it was quite a boring fight. He utilized a ton of lateral movement and just stayed at kicking range where he could land enough kicks against Jousset and cause him frustration. But Jousset was able to catch up a little bit in the third round. Unfortunately, it was too little, too late for him by then, and Micallef was able to get the win by decision. That is a far cry from the style that we saw him implement in his Contender Series matchup, where he took the striker Mohamed Addo to the ground, eventually got that submission, and was able to put him out cold. That's usually what Micallef looks to do. He looks to utilize his physicality and his strength with his BJJ game and his grappling to really just thwart opponents on the ground, muzzle them on the ground, and just have that major success from that top position. He's strong, he's physical, he's pretty big for the weight class as well, and that's where you see him try to utilize that physicality to better his opponents. Maybe we see him start to lean more on that mobile striking style so he can mix in his grappling behind it, but we'll see if he's able to do that here against Elliott, who is a solid grappler in his own right. Now, Elliott is coming off of a loss against Suk Hyung Ko in a fight where he was a pretty big favorite, but couldn't get off on much success of his own. After a few failed takedown attempts early, Ko started to command that fight with his power striking and eventually his own grappling, and it seemed to break Elliott around that second round, and from there it was just smooth sailing for the Korean fighter to hand Elliott the first loss of his UFC career. Elliott's a fun fighter. He's a talented fighter. He's only 28 years old, so I think that's going to be a great learning experience for him. Normally we see him utilizing a smother grappling approach, trying to keep his opponent on their back, trying to just smother them, maybe find some finishes if he can as well. And he can really turn it up a notch in deeper water, especially if the fight's going his way earlier on. Seeing him break against Ko was a little bit discouraging, especially as such a big favorite. But again, I think that's going to be a big learning lesson for this fighter, only at 28 years old. And I think we'll see him continue to get better as he starts to fight more stiffer competition. Grappling, good cardio, good top pressure, good chain wrestling, improving striking as well. Elliott has all the tools. It's now all about applying it. And I think he has a good shot of applying it here against Jonathan Micallef. Now, when these two were originally scheduled to fight each other back in September, Elliott closed, or at least until the fight got canceled, as a minus 120 favorite. Now, for some reason, after he pulled out due to an illness, he finds himself down at plus 110. I don't know if it has to do with this fight taking place in Australia, which I can't recall off the top of my head, but I think the last one was also in Australia. But still, Elliott now the underdog compared to being the slight favorite when they were scheduled the first time. So I already liked Elliott at minus 120, so obviously I like him here at plus 110. I feel like he'll be able to kind of shut down that mobile striking game of Micallef, and if this gets into the grappling realm, I think Elliott is the better scrambler, and that can help him accrue a little bit more top time and get off on some more damage here. I'd be surprised if Elliott gets stuck at distance the way that Juicy did against Micallef. So I fully expect Elliott to just get the better of Micallef in most instances. This could play out close, but I'm going to have to lean on Elliott as I think he's a little bit more well-rounded and will get the better of the grappling exchanges as well. So give me Elliott and Elliott by decision. Moving over to the middleweight division now, we got Jacob Malkoun coming in at minus 140, going up against the human fire hydrant, Taurus Finney, who comes in at plus 120. Now, starting off on the Malkoun side of things, he's been dealing with a lot of injuries in this half of his career. The most recent culprit has been a bulging disc in his lower back, and that's kept him out of competition for nearly 2 years. Last time around, we saw him go up against Andre Petroski in a fight I felt quite confident in him. I felt his constant forward pressure, his wrestling, his grappling, his smothering style would have worn Andre Petroski down and led to a either late stoppage or decision win for the Aussie fighter. But he struggled in that first round. Couldn't get off on much success. Even though he was the one constantly on his front foot and pushing Petroski backwards, Petroski constantly landed the better shots, and all three judges scored that first round for Petroski. Unfortunately for Petroski, he started off that second round by ramming his head into the hip of Malkoun, and that threw off his equilibrium, and Malkoun pounced on him and eventually got the TKO finish in the opening seconds of round 2. Probably one of the weirdest and rarest forms of knockouts that we'll ever see. A guy ramming his head into a guy's hip and then just falling over. It was weird in the moment, and I was thankful obviously because I had a little bit riding on Malkoun there, but in hindsight that probably wasn't the best play considering how much closer that fight ended up playing out. Again, I expected Malkoun to start running away with it in deeper water, having the better gas tank, but it is what it is. We didn't end up seeing it take place anyway. This is a guy that could easily be on a 3-fight winning streak had it not been that DQ against Cody Brundage, who I'm going to be talking about in a couple of fights as well. Malkoun was brutalizing Brundage, landing a lot of big ground and pound, but Brundage managed to sneak his head into a place where Malkoun ended up landing some shots to the back of the head and ended up getting DQ'd, unfortunately. Even in his fight against Brendan Allen, he had some good success against a guy in Allen who was a big favorite in that matchup. And I thought that Malkoun would have been able to grind out some positions and at least win 2 of those rounds. He had some good success in that first round, but he just did not land enough damage. And it was Allen who was landing more damage in that round. And that's why all 3 judges scored that first round for Allen. The second round, Malkoun was able to get it back, had a good success in that second round, but then start to fall off with his efficiency in the third round and ended up losing that decision. But it was more competitive than people expected it to be. Malkoun has kind of underachieved in the UFC thus far. His smothering grappling style, his high pressure, high pace, good cardio makes him a very tough cookie to crack, but his durability has kind of bit him in the ass in the past, and that's something to keep an eye on, especially in this matchup going up against the tank that is Torres Finney. Now, Finney looks much more intimidating than he actually fights at times. And nothing is more true than his last win, which was his UFC debut against Robert Valentin. That was a matchup where he controlled over 13 minutes of that 15-minute fight. He went 8 of 17 on takedowns, but he landed a grand total of 4 significant strikes over those 15 minutes. He didn't land a single significant strike in the first or third round of the fight. All 4 of those strikes came in the second round. He got outstruck 23-4 by Valentin, even though Valentin was in a defensive position the entire time. On total strikes, he landed 17 total strikes compared to the 93 that Valentin landed. One judge even scored all 3 rounds for Valentin, even though he was on his back the entire time. One judge, I believe, scored all 3 rounds for Finney, or at least 2 of the 3 rounds for Finney. So Finney only won by split decision, largely because he was in the top position for the entire fight, but just did not get off on enough damage at all. If he has enough of a advantage over his opponents in the grappling realm and skill-wise, he can go out there and finish them, just as he did against Yuri Panfarov and Abdul Irami, which was the fight that eventually got him into the UFC. But he just utilizes his strength and grappling in such a boring manner that I wouldn't be surprised if the UFC just lets him go at the end of his contract, or even cuts him after his first loss that he could eventually suffer. He has big power in his hands. He explodes into a lot of his shots that way. But for the most part, he wants to drag opponents to the ground and smother them from that top position and try to find ways to get to a finishing position. But if he can't, he's holding more than he's throwing shots, and that's going to be a big detriment as he fights tougher and tougher grapplers. And that's what he's going up here against with Jacob Malkoun. Both these guys are kind of similar fighters, but Malkoun a little bit better in terms of inflicting damage and threatening with finishing positions. I'm so on the fence about this matchup because the layoff for Malkoun makes this a little bit more challenging of a fight to predict. The strength advantage of Finney makes it a little bit tougher to predict. With Malkoun, he's a guy that doesn't really settle for bad positions. He always finds ways to just creep his head up and start to get in on the hips of his opponents, even if he finds himself on his back. He gets on a hip when he needs to. He's able to find reversals. He throws up submissions off of his back. So I think Finney's going to have to constantly work to try to keep Malkoun down, and that's going to eventually start working in Malkoun's favor. If Malkoun comes in shape, he's going to be able to out-scramble Finney. He's going to have a better gas tank down the stretch. And as long as Malkoun doesn't need a big shot from Finney on the feet, Malkoun could grind this one out. So initially, my thoughts are Malkoun by decision. But if Finney goes out there and wants to prove the doubters wrong and throw with big power, he can absolutely land on Malkoun and knock him out that way. So mixing in the power threat of Finney, mixing in the layoff for Malkoun, this fight's tough to really get a complete edge on, in my opinion, but I will go with the Aussie here. I think Malkoun ends up getting those positions, landing more effective damage over 15 minutes, and I think that leads to him grinding this fight out and winning it on the scorecards. All right, moving over to another middleweight battle here. We got Cam Rowston coming in at minus 345, going up against Cody Brundage, who comes in at plus 285. Now, starting off on the Rowston side of things, the Battle Giraffe. I've never been that high on Rowston through his Contender Series fight and even the Petrosky fight, but he is slowly winning me over. Standing at 6'3" in the middleweight division with a 75-inch reach, it's often that he has, a bit of an advantage no matter who he ends up facing. Initially, I thought he was more of a striker, but with his BJJ brown belt, he's been finding positions on the mat to really cause issues to opponents there. After losing to Torres Finney, he went back to the regional scene, had some good success there, and then he eventually got another shot on the Contender Series, and he was able to finish, I think it was Brandon Holmes? Yeah, Brandon Holmes. He tried going to his grappling with Holmes, but Holmes defended very well. And then Rowston decided to strike, and then he was able to stalk and walk Holmes down, eventually leading to a barrage of strikes to put Holmes away. Same thing happened in the Petrosky fight, where he was able to keep Petrosky at bay and then eventually landed a big shot to drop Petrosky, and he ended off that fight with some nasty elbows from the top position. This guy's nasty with his striking when he gets into his groove. When he finds his timing, when he finds his range, he's able to snipe opponents from distance, and that really helps him set up the rest of his game. I think he feels most comfortable on the mat, where he feels like his long limbs can help him set up submissions or even get to better dominant positions. But on the feet, if he continues to improve his confidence, he's going to be a very tough double-edged sword here. Do you want to strike with him and try to deal with his distance, or do you want to try to grapple with him and the long limbs that he brings to the table? Guys have been able to grind him out in the past, right? Sometimes he trusts his BJJ too much and he's fighting off his back and he ends up losing minutes there, but he's getting better. He's becoming a little bit more aware in terms of what being in a defensive position looks like compared to working off of his back, finding reversals, finding submissions, or even looking to just get back to his feet and having success there. He's going up against Cody Brundage, who's the wild card in the UFC, right? 11-7-1. He has no contests on his record. He has draws on his record. He has split decisions on his record, wins or losses. Most notably his last one, which was a split decision loss against Eric McConaughey, where both guys kind of just nullified each other, right? I think one judge had all 3 rounds for Brundage, one judge had all 3 rounds for McConaughey, and then the dissenting judge obviously had not the dissenting judge, but the most notable judge had McConaughey up 2 rounds to 1 there on Brundage. Brundage is a guy that used to rely on his wrestling. Now he's a little bit more chaotic with his power striking. If he sees openings for his wrestling, he'll obviously lean on that and try to get some control time. But, you never know what you're going to get with Brundage. This plus 285 could end up looking pretty good for him if he can crash the pocket and land some big shots of his own. But he has some durability issues at times. He seems like a guy, as soon as he gets hurt, he kind of looks for the door. But there are fights where he's been able to battle back from adversity like he did against Julian Marquez. My breakdown for Brundage is just all over the place because that's just who he is. He's just a wild card. It's tough to really tell what version of him we're going to get whenever he steps foot in the cage. Now he's going up against Cam Rowston here, where he's going to have to overcome a 3-inch reach disadvantage as well as a 3-inch height disadvantage. He does have the explosivity and power to do it, so there is that possibility he can land that bomb on Rowston. But I think that Rowston improving his confidence, getting better as a striker, should allow him to really see those shots coming from Brundage, snipe him down the pipe with some good counters, and I wouldn't even be surprised if he ends up getting this, a club and sub position where maybe he hurts Brundage goes in for a takedown, just reverting back to his first martial art, and then leaving his neck open for Rowston, who could absolutely snatch it up and force the tap as well. So originally I was a little bit skeptical in terms of taking the chalk on Rowston, but again, Brundage is just such a wild card, but also a liability, and one that I feel like Rowston can absolutely take full advantage of. So I'm going to go Rowston here and Rowston inside the distance. I don't mind the chalk if you can find something to parlay with him with. I wouldn't bat an eye at it, but I think Rowston wins here, and I think he wins inside the distance. All right, moving over to our next matchup here, which takes place in the light heavyweight division. We got Junior Tafa, my favorite fade in the UFC, coming in at plus 205, going up against Billy Elekana, who comes in at minus 240. Now, starting off on the Tafa side of things, Tafa is coming off of a submission loss at the hands of Tuco Tokos. Now, that was a fight where he found himself as a decent-sized favorite, and I was so happy to take the underdog price on Tokos, who I know is a BJJ black belt, and he knew the script. He knew the game plan. He knew exactly what to do, and he got right to work, getting Tafa to the ground repeatedly. He was able to get some good submission attempts off in that first round. He did almost fumble the bag at the ending of that first round, where Tafa was able to get on top and land some big shots, so much so that I think 1 or 2 of the judges even gave that round to Tafa, even though Tafa was defending for 4.5 minutes out of the 5 minutes of that round. But luckily, Tokos eventually got in on the takedown again in the second round, gave up position, got another takedown, and then eventually broke Tafa down, got that arm triangle choke position, and forced the tap from the Queensland native. Tafa, I don't get why this guy's in the UFC, other than the fact that his brother Justin is in the UFC, and other than the fact that he comes from a decent kickboxing background and has some decent pop on his shots. This is a guy that could easily be winless in the UFC right now. had he not had egregious cage grabs against Parker Porter and Sean Sharaf, he could easily have been finished by both of those guys. Seeing the ease in which Walter Walker was able to get him to the ground and submit him. Same thing with Tuco Tokos. You can see where the holes in his game are. Sure, he could have some success on the feet. Sure, he might have decent cardio where he could just Homer Simpson his way to a knockout victory later on, like he's done against Parker Porter and Sean Sharaf. On the ground is where he constantly struggles. He's slowly, you see the improvements in terms of his process of takedown defense, pushing on the head and all that, but he just does not seem all that comfortable defending takedown after takedown. He needs fights to be standing to have any sort of success. If he's fighting a grappler of any sort, more often than not, it's likely that he's going to end up losing, especially if his opponent has good enough cardio and good enough wrestling to begin with. Now he's going up against Billy Elekana, who's coming off of a nasty club and sub victory over Kevin Christian. I believe that was back in November. I could be off in terms of when that fight actually took place, but he was a big favorite in that fight. Was a big underdog against Ibo Aslan, was able to get the win there. I was happy about that. And then he came in minus 250 against Kevin Christian and got the club and sub victory there. Elekana is a solid BJJ specialist, but I believe his initial martial art was striking. I think he was more of a kickboxer than a grappler. But since moving to Las Vegas over the last couple of years, I think he moved over COVID. He's set up camp at BJJ gyms and really focused on that aspect of his game so that he can mix that in behind his striking game. In the striking realm, he's very educated. He can time his entries very well. His defenses are usually pretty good, but I think a lot of people gave him flack for his short notice UFC debut against Bogdan Guskov. He went grapple heavy from the jump, ended up gassing out, and then eventually getting finished by Guskov in the second, but he's starting to create some momentum for himself and getting the respect of the betting market, especially with him coming in at minus 240 in this fight. Like I said, he's very good in terms of timing his strikes, good with his grappling, and a nasty BJJ specialist when he can get those positions, just as he did against Kevin Christian. Now here, against Junior Tafa, it's Tafa's knockout power against Elekana's well-roundedness. Can Tafa land a big shot and knock out Elekana? It's absolutely possible. But if Elekana plays this safe enough, finds his openings, counters Tafa, changes levels and gets this fight into the grappling realm, I think he can get the submission within a round and a half. I was kind of hoping that Elekana TKO'd Kevin Christian because we'd get a damn good submission line on Elekana in this matchup. But now, sitting at plus 210, the submission prop is the most favored prop to hit in this matchup for Elekana. I think he does it. I think he does it with somewhat ease. Again, this is mixed martial arts. It's very volatile. So it's absolutely possible that Tafa can land that knockout shot, but I think Elekana is just too slick. I think he'll evade those big shots, get in another takedown, get to a submission position, and I think shortly thereafter he'll be able to find the tap here. So give me Elekana by sub, and I do not at all mind this chalk on him. All right, moving over to the lightweight division now. We got a matchup here between two Aussies. Not often you see Aussies going up against each other. You got Killin Salkilld coming in at minus 800, going up against Jamie Mullarkey, who comes in at plus 575, but also on short notice. All right, we'll start off on the Salkilld side of things here, who is on a very solid winning streak. I believe he only lost his first pro fight, and ever since he's rattled off 10 straight wins now. Most impressive, the last one, which was a short notice spot against Nasrat Haqparast. I believe that fight was back in October, and he landed a nasty head kick that flatlined Haqparast halfway through that first round. That was a fight where I believe the odds were quite close. Maybe Salkilld was a slight underdog, but I felt it was more than worthy considering how dangerous this guy can actually be. He's a BJJ black belt, but you wouldn't be able to tell that with how confidently he strikes and how well he puts his combinations together, his kicks together, and even sets up traps to set up the knockouts like he did against Anshul Jubli and even Nasrat Haqparast. Against Haqparast, he was blasting the body shot. They're fighting from an open stance, so you can see him really targeting the body of Haqparast, and then eventually he snuck that head kick a little bit higher than Haqparast was able to get his guard, and it face-planted Haqparast. It was one of the best knockouts of 2025, and I was very happy for Salkilld who, the guy deserves his props. He's very skilled, and at 26 years old, he still has a ton more growing to do and could become one of the better fighters in this division. Good striking, good grappling, good experience that he's gaining now as well. And the one thing I always want to mention in his backgrounds is his Dana White Contender Series matchup that earned him his contract to the UFC against Gage Young. He had a very good first round. Second round, it seemed like his body language was starting to get a little bit negative. He was starting to slow down a little bit, it seemed, but then he kicked it into the next gear in that third round, and he won it clearly, and he won the fight on the scorecards, got the UFC contract as well. And Gage Young, as we've already seen, is a very skilled fighter in his own right. Now he's going up against a veteran here, Jamie Mullarkey, who's looking to build off a November victory that he had over the likes of Rolando Bedoya. That was a fight, I believe was a pick'em going into it, but Mullarkey showcased his well-roundedness and his ability to just win fights in either realm. He took off about 1.5 years between the Ruffy and Bedoya fight because he wanted to shake off that, the damage that he suffered at the hands of Hackpress and Ruffy, where he got knocked out in both of those fights. Sitting on the sidelines for 1.5 years, he took to his BJJ game, where he earned his BJJ brown belt, took part in a lot of grappling competitions, and we saw him utilize that in the first round of his fight against Bedoya. He got a takedown, constantly worked to the back of Bedoya, grinded that position out for the full first 5 minutes, and then in the second round, he kind of started to fall short on the takedowns as Bedoya was more so privy to that game plan approach, but Mullarkey still managed to land big shots in that second round that clearly earned him that round. That third round, though, it seemed like that pace and style he was trying to keep was starting to catch up to him. And Bedoya started to put his foot on the gas, landed some big shots on Mullarkey, busted Mullarkey up. Luckily, Mullarkey saw the final bell and was able to get his hand raised on the scorecards. Mullarkey is one of the more mediocre fighters on the roster. He's 6-6 through his 12 fights with the promotion, beating the McDessies and the Bedoyas, but then coming up short against the Naimovs and Hoofies and Hackprasts. He can, fight in either realm. It's really just his durability that is a little bit of a question mark at times. He has decent enough cardio in most of his fights. And again, if he needs to strike against certain opponents, he can have success there. If he needs to rely on his grappling, he can have success there as well. But this one's going to be a tough one against Salkilld. Mullarkey has the experience advantage, especially being in the UFC longer than Salkilld has. He has, 10 more UFC fights than Salkilld has. I think 9 or 10 fights, I believe it is. So this line kind of, catches me off guard. Do I think Salkilld wins? More than likely. Do I think he deserves to be minus 800? Probably not. If he can't finish Mullarkey, this could end up playing out a little bit closer, right? Mullarkey might be able to implement some of his physicality, put Salkilld on the defensive, and could make this one close. But I think Salkilld will end up landing more damage throughout this matchup, and I think he ends up winning it on the scorecards. I get it. Ruffy and Hackpress both finished Mullarkey, so who's to say that Salkilld can't do the same thing? The difference being here, I think Mullarkey will get engaged more in the grappling realm, and I think he could have some success there to maybe even steal a round. With that said, I think as we get down the stretch, Salkilld will start to pull away as he defends, lands his Muay Thai, lands his combinations, and I think he wins this on the scorecard or gets a late finish. The line that stands out to me the most, though, is the over 2.5 at plus 125. There are some concerns, like I said, on the durability of Mullarkey, but I believe that line is the way it is because of the recency bias of Salkilld finishing both Nasrat Hackpress and then that 14-second knockout that he had against Anshul Jubli. But I feel like this could play out closer to the Gage Young fight. There is going to be instances of success from both guys, Mullarkey in the grappling realm and Salkilld with his defense and his striking advantage, which is why I expect this fight to hit the scorecard. So the over 1.5 plus 125 is kind of where I'm leaning the most in this fight, but I still think Salkilld ends up getting the win here. Either a late finish or by decision. My official prediction will be Salkilld by decision. All right, moving over to the heavy hitters now. We got the heavyweights throwing down as we have Tuivasa coming in at plus 235, going up against Teixeira, who comes in at minus 275. Now, I'll start off on the Tuivasa side of things, who's on a 5-fight losing streak. We do not often see the UFC give guys an opportunity after a 3-fight losing streak, not even after a 4-fight losing streak, let alone a 5-fight losing streak. But considering the popularity, considering the pull that Tuivasa has, the UFC is probably still leaving hope that he has what it takes to still notch a win and save his UFC roster spot. At his best, power puncher, good leg kicks. He's very, dense as well, the way that he kind of steps in the cage and just the way that he fights. But we know often he's going to get outstruck by more technical strikers, just as we saw in the Jairzinho Rozenstruik fight, which I want to make a note on when I get back to it. Or he gets submitted by better grapplers, like we saw against Marcin Tybura and Alexander Volkov. Or he gets knocked out clean against Sergey Pavlovich, or gets touched up and eventually knocked out like he did against Saragon. So he's usually outskilled in a lot of his fights, right? It comes down to him landing that power and trying to get opponents out of there like he did against Derek Lewis. So those are the things that we need to focus in on. Against Rozenstruik, he lost by split decision in one of the most egregious scorecards I think we've ever seen in the history of the UFC. One judge scored all 3 rounds for Tai Tuivasa, even though he got tripled up on every single round. Or the entire fight. I think it was like 93 significant strikes that Rozenstruik landed compared to the 32 strikes. Maybe not 32. I forgot exactly how much it was, but it was like 30-something strikes that Tuivasa landed. Tuivasa was moving forward the entire time, so maybe that played into that judge, but still. It was clear that Rozenstruik was landing early, landing often, and landing more shots, and that should have been favored much more than the forward pressure of Tuivasa. You got to wonder how invested Tuivasa is in this game, right? Credit to him. He got very popular. He has the whole shoey gimmick going on for him. But it's clear that he's invested in a lot of businesses outside of mixed martial arts to try to set him up, for his post-UFC fight career, I guess you can say. He even invested in some sport where it's like, 2 guys running into each other. It's the dumbest thing that I've seen since freaking Power Slap. But he's moved from Australia to Dubai. Seems like that's where a lot of the business opportunities are for him as well. And that's where he's looking to take advantage. So credit him for looking after himself in that aspect. But in terms of fighting, you got to be 100% in. And you know who's 100% in? Thaleson Teixeira. A guy that stormed his way into the UFC through the Contender Series, finished Justin Tafa in mere seconds, and then eventually got propelled right into a main event slot for a fight night against a UFC record holder of knockouts, Derek the Black Beast Lewis. Was that too quick for Teixeira? Most would say yes, but that just shows you how shallow the heavyweight division is. All you need is one good knockout win, and you might find yourself close to title contention, or at least close enough to headline a fight night against a guy that's been in the UFC for 10 plus years. That was Teixeira's fate last time around as he took on Derek Lewis and unfortunately got knocked out in 35 seconds, showcasing that it might have been a little bit too soon for the youngster. He's 26 years old, stands at a towering 6'7" frame with an 83-inch reach, and he's a BJJ black belt. But he's been disposing of all of his opponents by strikes. 7 of his 8 wins coming by knockout, 1 of them coming by submission. You see him leaning on the grappling in some fights, trying to utilize that physicality and that size to keep opponents on their back and then just rain down with big shots or threaten with submissions, or just walking through guys with big power punches like he did against Justin Tafa. He is, decently skilled. His frame and his size and his physicality kind of makes him an outlier in the rest of the heavyweight division. But that power that he's able to generate because of that size will always make him dangerous no matter who he ends up fighting. Now here in this matchup, there is a tremendous experience advantage for the Aussie fighter, for Tuivasa. But the layoff, the half in, half out mentality that he has, and the monster that he's going up against, it makes sense why Teixeira is up at minus 275. Can Tuivasa land a big strike and put Teixeira down? Maybe. But I think that we see Teixeira look to get this fight where he gets the least amount of resistance from Tuivasa. I think he can get the takedown. I think he can quickly get that top position. And I think from there, he either threatens with submissions or that TKO. You can get Teixeira by submission sitting at plus 700. Tuivasa is very susceptible to getting submitted, and I think if Teixeira is smart enough, you'll see that, and I think he can line up a pretty easy arm triangle position and get the finish that way. Unless he finds himself right in full mount, he could just elbow his way to a TKO finish there as well. So I think Teixeira runs through Tuivasa. Tuivasa does not inspire much confidence considering where he's at in his career right now. He's not old by any means, but he's just clearly not with his head in the game anymore, and I think Teixeira will make him pay for that. So give me Thaleson Teixeira. I'm going to say by submission. And I might take a little bit of a poke on that prop as well. But yeah, I'm going to go Taliesin Teixeira by sub. In the lightweight division, as we have a striker's delight between Rafael Fiziev coming in at plus 110, going up against the striking stylings of Mauricio Ruffy, who comes in at minus 130. Now, starting off on the Fiziev side of things, he was able to snap a 3-fight losing streak that he had back in July, I believe it was, where he fought in his native Azerbaijan and was able to pick up a clear-cut decision win over Ignacio Bahamondes, who was streaking going into that matchup. Now, let's talk about that 3-fight losing streak for Fiziev, though. The first of which was against Justin Gaethje, high-profile fight. I believe it was a co-main event for one of the cards that he was on. I think it was the Edwards and Bilal card. I could be off on that. But Fiziev takes on Gaethje, and unfortunately, Gaethje just had his number. He was able to outstrike him. I think Gaethje came on strong in the second and third rounds after a close first round, and Fiziev just couldn't get off on much success after that. Then he goes up against Mateusz Gamrot in a main event slot and injures his knee in the opening seconds, I believe, of the second round. So he takes the loss there by TKO. So, an asterisk beside that, considering he got injured instead of actually being finished. Then he takes on Justin Gaethje a year and a half after getting injured on short notice. I thought that was a horrible move. Not the best fight to come back to after a layoff on short notice, after an injury like the way that he had against a guy that seems to have your number. And again, it played out similarly. It seemed like he had some decent success in the first round, and then after that, Gaethje really put his foot on the gas in the second and thirds. Fiziev did pull out some of his grappling in that fight. He did land 2 takedowns on Gaethje, but wasn't really able to muster up a whole lot of control there. At his best, Fiziev is a nasty Muay Thai striker. Very good combinations, very good leg kicks, very good countering ability, and his speed really helps him get to the target pretty quickly. It's just tough when he's fighting a hard-nosed striker like Gaethje, who was able to kind of just bonk him anytime he tried to throw a kick and just really derail the type of confidence that Fiziev was trying to muster up. But now he showed a great thing in the Bahamondes fight, mixing it up, landed 4 takedowns against Bahamondes, had some decent control time, countered the long, lanky striking style of Bahamondes, and really didn't lose many minutes in that round. There was a cut that Bahamondes was able to open up on Fiziev in that third round, but outside of that, he really struggled to get off on Fiziev. There was crazy, he landed at a 54% clip. Now, take this into consideration. Fiziev threw 34 less significant strikes than Bahamondes, but landed 12 more because he was landing at a 54% clip, whereas Bahamondes was only landing at a 34% clip. A lot of that with Fiziev getting out of the way, getting a lot of those shots on the guard, just showcases how good, technically speaking, Fiziev is as well. And to see him implementing the wrestling as well, he's really rounding out the rest of his game. Now, he's going up against Mauricio Ruffy. He was looking to bounce back after fumbling the bag as a big favorite against Benoit Saint Denis. That one, I'm surprised at how many people were confident in Ruffy going into that fight. I get it. He had highlight reel knockouts over Jamie Mullarkey and Bobby King Green. But if you do the tape on him and if you just look deeper into his career, you see the issues that he has in the grappling realm. Sure, he showcased decent grappling defense in the first round and a half against Saint Denis, but he still found himself in those bad positions consistently and unable to muster up the confidence to let go with his dangerous striking and flashy striking game. It was so apparent in that second round that he was broken, even that when he worked back to his feet, he constantly just backed his way back into bad positions, allowed Saint Denis to crash the pocket without much resistance, and allowed Saint Denis to get those dominant positions again, sink in that rear naked choke, and get the tap. I think it was a neck crank as well. So, Ruffy just seemed very mentally broken at that point in time. He struggles a lot with grapplers, and he finally fought a good enough grappler last time against Saint Denis that we finally saw that hole exposed in his game. You would have seen it if you watched his Dana White Contender Series fight, which he was losing 99% of until his opponent death gassed, and Ruffy was able to get a dominant position and TKO that opponent with 15 seconds left in the fight. If he didn't get that position, he would have lost the fight, and we would have never known of Mauricio Ruffy. He's a talented striker, don't get me wrong. Fighting Nerds representative. He's kind of mixed things up this time around where he went to Bang Tao Muay Thai to train in Thailand for a little bit, went to the UFC PI in Vegas, and now since January 7th, I believe, or at least the beginning of January, he went down to Australia to acclimate to the time zone and everything, and now is training alongside Alexander Volkanovski, helping Volkanovski prepare for Lopes, considering they have a similar frame. And then obviously Ruffy trying to absorb when he can from a high-level champion like Volkanovski as well. So I'm sure we'll see improvements from Ruffy's game, but I still think he's that guy that needs to have his space, allow opponents to kind of just allow him to dictate the pace so that he can just get off on his shots and have success. But just watch his fights. Even the James Lontop fight, he lost that third round because he couldn't maintain that space. And Lontop was just on him like a dog. In this matchup, the way he matches up against Rafael Fiziev reminds me of a fight that Ruffy had earlier on in his career. He went up against a guy named Manuel Sosa, who just earned his contract on the Contender Series this past season and who we'll be seeing in 2026 and may be a damn good prospect in his own right. Both guys, nasty, hard-nosed Muay Thai specialists, and Sosa was able to just walk through that flashy style of Ruffy. That was the first time I actually had even heard of Ruffy when I was studying up on Sosa back when he fought on the PFL Challenger Series. I was just like, hey, look, we got a wannabe Conor here from Brazil, the way that I saw Ruffy fighting, right? Kind of mirrors his stance, likes to fight with that bladed stance, like to use that straight cross down the pipe, likes to be very fancy and unorthodox with a lot of his shots. Really resembled a lot of what I'd seen from Conor in back of the day. And he was able to, muster that up and get work back from that Sosa loss, get to the Contender Series and now have a, solid start to his UFC career until running into Benoit Saint Denis. But now he's fighting a similar guy to Manuel Sosa here in Fiziev. So to see Fiziev as the underdog and the line continuing to move towards Ruffy has me boggled. Fiziev, his durability has largely been ironclad. Can Ruffy land that pinpoint shot to hurt Fiziev? Maybe. But I think Fiziev is going to push that pace, counter Ruffy effectively, keep Ruffy moving backwards, land those big shots, mix in takedowns too. I think his wrestling is good enough now to keep Ruffy on his back. Fiziev has all of the advantages in this matchup. How he's the underdog is mind-blowing to me. But here we are. And this is the spot that we got to take advantage of. So I'm going to go Fiziev here. And I think so much so to the point that Fiziev even gets to finish in round 2 or round 3. There it is. Rafael Fiziev by knockout, round 2 or round 3. Reminding people that Ruffy is more hype than he is actually talented. All right, that brings us to now our co-main event in the lightweight division where we got Hooker coming in at plus 270 and the Frenchman Benoit Saint Denis coming in at minus 330. Now, we'll start off on the Hooker side of things, who had his 3-fight winning streak snapped back in November or in December. I think it was December actually, where he came up short against Arman Tsarukyan. Now, Tsarukyan, we know what he does. Wrestling, takedowns, top pressure, and eventually worked to a submission position in that second round and got Hooker out of there. But Hooker, during that 3-fight winning streak, showcased some decent defensive grappling, specifically against Mateusz Gamrot. Hooker, found reversals, found moments to get back to his feet, found the spots to land more damage than Gamrot. Whereas Gamrot was just looking to smother and hold Hooker down. But Hooker shows that he can be hard to hold down if you don't have a crushing and smothering top pressure game or have good enough cardio to constantly keep him in those positions. At his best, Hooker is a guy that constantly moves forward, throws Muay Thai combinations, nasty knees, nasty elbows. He's one of the more BMF type guys that we have on the roster. He loves to fight. He loves bloody fights. He loves to put his chin on the line. He doesn't mind if he gets knocked out. That's why he has a, mediocre-ish record at 24-13. But he is a guy that will push opponents to the brink. And if they can't, take that, they're often going to falter and he's going to be able to run away with fights. But it's just that defensive grappling that often gives me pause in terms of whether he's going to win fights or not. And that's clearly going to be tested here against Benoit Saint Denis, who's going to be looking to build upon his 3-fight winning streak that he has over Kyle Prepelic, Maurizio Ruffy, and then that quick 14-second knockout that he had over Beneil Dariush. I believe that was back in December. Now, we'll go back to the Ruffy fight. I kind of talked about it already when we talked about Ruffy in the last fight, but Saint Denis, plus 170 underdog that night, that was a no-brainer. This guy is very good in terms of smothering his opponents, very good in terms of getting the back of his opponents, and then threatening with submission after submission, and it ultimately ended up to him getting that second-round sub over the Brazilian. I was fading him in the fight against Dariush because I thought Dariush was just a better version of Saint Denis. I thought his grappling was good enough to stay away from any threat that Saint Denis would have there. I thought, technically speaking, Dariush was the better striker as well, which I still think. Saint Denis, in terms of a striker, is just a kicker. He's kind of like Paddy Pimblett in the fact that a lot of his offensive striking comes from kicks from distance so that he can eventually mask the takedown behind it or a body lock and then get to the grappling after that. But we didn't get to see that fight play out at all because Dariush's chin is dust. It is nothing. And Saint Denis exposed it right away as he hit him with pretty much the first shot that he landed. He put Dariush away and was able to get the win there by knockout. Saint Denis, very talented grappler, very good finisher as well. Not often do we see his fights spill into the third round. When he's unable to get that early finish, things start to go a little bit haywire for him, as we saw in the Dustin Poirier fight. There may be that asterisk that he had staff going into that matchup as well, so that's something to take into consideration. But I really want to talk a little bit more about that Ruffy fight. That was a fight where, Ruffy did a decent job in terms of fighting off a lot of the early submission attempts from Saint Denis. But seeing how Ruffy was dejected and broken and demoralized, Saint Denis was able to get to the takedowns easier in deep water and eventually work to that submission spot. Here against Hooker, it might be a little bit more difficult. Now, I think Saint Denis can work to a position where he can get that submission within the first 2 rounds, maybe round and a half. But if Hooker shows off a good enough submission defense, he might be able to make this a little bit harder on Saint Denis. So it's hard for me to get behind the minus 330 on Saint Denis. What I like is the fight doesn't go to decision, which is sitting at minus 220-ish. That might obviously take some action as we get closer to fight day. So that's something I'm going to keep an eye on. But late Hooker props are kind of what I'm, liking. I think it was like plus 1,500, plus 1,800 that I'd seen on round 2 and round 3 for Hooker. I don't think Hooker will be as easy to break as Ruffy was. So as long as Hooker's submission defense is good enough for the first 6 to 7 minutes and he constantly works back to his feet and puts that pressure on Saint Denis, he might be able to replicate what Dustin Poirier was able to do. So I'm making all the points here for Hooker, but I still think Saint Denis wins. I think he gets that submission within the first round. But if he doesn't, that minus 330 is going to fall off a cliff, and Hooker could make this very challenging for Saint Denis late. Mix in the, I don't know why I thought that Hooker had much more of a size and reach advantage. It's only like 1 inch or 2 inches on either metric there. But still, the striking advantage from Hooker, the pace, the cardio advantage could definitely come into play here. So I like fight doesn't go to decision the most. I'd rather pay chalk on that than the minus 330 on Saint Denis. I think Saint Denis gets the submission, but Hooker is live in this matchup to pull off the upset with his striking advantage. And if his grappling defense looks as good as it did against Mateusz Gamrot, who knows? But final prediction here will be Benoit Saint Denis by submission. All right, let's go to the main event now, which is for the featherweight championship, as we have champion Alexander Volkanovski looking to defend his title for the first time during the second reign as a minus 145 favorite, going up against oncoming challenger Diego Lopes, who comes in at plus 125. Now, I'll obviously touch on their first fight when I get into the prediction portion of this breakdown, but let's go to the backgrounds first. Well, you got Alexander Volkanovski, looked like going down as one of the best fighters of all time, considering the streak that he was on before he ran into Islam Makhachev in a fight where he tried to have a legacy fight. He tried to get the lightweight title, went up a division, had a very close fight against Makhachev. Very, very close fight. Ended up losing a decision that night. Then he went back down to featherweight, finished Yair Rodriguez, reminded us why he was the best featherweight on the planet at the time. Then he took another short notice matchup against Islam Makhachev, got knocked out in the first round there with a head kick. He clearly wasn't in shape, clearly wasn't prepared enough to take that type of challenge on, and he paid for it dearly. Then the gameness in him, the fighter in him, put him into the cage a lot sooner than he should have against Elliott. And after having a decent first round where all three judges scored that first round in his favor, he ended up getting corralled against the cage against Topuria, and not even an elephant was going to be able to eat the shot that Volkanovski ate that put his lights out, giving the featherweight title to Topuria. But luckily for Volkanovski, around the time that he decided to finally get back into action and take the time off that he needed, Topuria decided to go up to lightweight, vacating the featherweight title and giving the opportunity for Volkanovski to go out there and fight for it once again like he did in April against Diego Lopes and getting the win there and putting that title back around his waist. What makes Volkanovski so good is his overall game. He's a very technical and educated striker who does a great job in terms of utilizing his 71-inch reach to just keep that jab out there, keep it in his opponent's face, moving as well. His footwork is really good. He angles off very well. He knows when to implement the leg kick as well to stay busy. And he also has a very good wrestling game. He can out-grapple his opponents if he needs to. His submission defense, we've seen all of it, right? The Brian Ortega fight where he found himself in deep submissions but never tapped because he knew the discipline and the defenses to work out of those positions, eventually getting to really good positions, getting out of those submission attempts and getting back to work. He is so well-rounded. The only thing that's really going to derail him is his durability, as we saw in the Makhachev and Topuria fights, and maybe age, as he is 37 years old now. At a certain point, the body takes over the mind, and it's not able to keep up with what the mind wants to do. Now, he's going up against 31-year-old Diego Lopes, who had a solid run to start his UFC career. Obviously fell short in his short notice UFC debut against Movsar Evloev, but after that, he was able to muster up a few finishes. Then he got that win over Dan Ige. Then he was able to get that Noche UFC win over Brian Ortega, and that led him to his first title shot against Alexander Volkanovski, where we obviously know he ended up losing on the scorecards. Then he managed to bounce back in September against Gene Silva in a very fun fight. John Silva, I should say, by the way. I keep getting mixed up. Spelling says Gene, but it's John. Anyway, had a great first round, got Silva's back, got some submission opportunities, couldn't get the finish. Momentum seemed to be shifting to Silva's side as he started to walk Lopes down and land big haymaker after big haymaker. But luckily, thanks to the durability of Lopes, he was able to eat those big shots, drag Silva into more of a war, and then eventually land a nasty spinning back elbow that eventually saw him get the finish against Silva. That was enough for the UFC to be like, you know what? Screw Lerone Murphy. Screw Movsar Evloev. Let's give Diego Lopes another title shot. So here we are with him fighting Volkanovski once again. What makes Lopes so dangerous is his very slick submission game. He's very aggressive on the mat, whether he's on his back or finds himself on his opponent's back. But he's also gained a lot of confidence in his striking game, as we've seen. And I think that's the shortcomings that we saw in the Volkanovski fight. Sure, he can knock out Sadiq Youssef and Gavin Tucker or the other guys that he was able to knock out. Pat Sabatini, I believe, was the other one. But if he can't get the knockout and he can't assert his dominance with that intimidation, things start to get a little bit iffy, right? And I think that's where we saw the hype really start to catch up to Lopes. And I think that's where we saw Volkanovski really start to expose him. Now, talking about their first fight, which took place back in April, it was the last fight for Volkanovski, and it was 2 fights to go for Diego Lopes. In the first round, Volkanovski did a great job in terms of sticking and moving, utilizing that jab, and really thwarting that aggression that Lopes was trying to implement. The second round was kind of going the same way, and Volkanovski was doing a good job in terms of, like I said, sticking and moving, but he also tried to implement a few takedown attempts and really rough Lopes up against the cage. But near the ending of that round, Lopes landed a big shot on Volkanovski that dropped Volk. But Volkanovski really had his wits still about him, so he was able to scramble well and work out of that bad position and then get back on the gas there. But it was at the end of the round, and it was the last thing that 2 of the judges saw. So 2 of those judges actually scored it in favor of Lopes. In the third round, Volkanovski got back to the same game plan and really frustrated Lopes. And then in the fourth round, similar, where Lopes had a little bit more success. He opened up a cut on Volkanovski, and I think 2 of the judges scored that round for Lopes as well. And then in the fifth round, even though Lopes was walking forward the entire time, it was obvious that Volkanovski was landing much more effective damage, especially with his jab and thwarting that constant forward pressure of Lopes. I believe, at the end of it, Volkanovski outstruck Lopes 158-63 while landing at a 61% clip. In rounds 3 and 5, Lopes only landed 24% and 23% respectively, showcasing how effective Volkanovski was with sticking and moving and making Lopes whiff at air. Lopes was getting really frustrated at the ending of that 5th round. You can see him calling Volkanovski on, pointing to the ground, but Volk's not going to fall for that stuff, and he was able to continuously land those jabs. Lopes did have a barrage of shots to end off that fight, but it was not enough to get the judges to sway that round back in his favor. So at the end of it, one judge had Lopes winning rounds 2 and 4, and then the other 2 judges only gave 1 round apiece to Lopes, allowing Volkanovski to win that fight 49-46 times 2, and then 48-47. This time around, maybe we see Lopes be a little bit more aggressive, try to land that big shot on Volkanovski. He was able to hurt him in the second round. Maybe he just kind of bites the mouth guard a little bit more, eats the jab consistently a little bit more, but tries to crash the pocket so he can finally land that big shot on Volkanovski and get him out of there that way. But I believe Volkanovski's fight IQ and tactician-like skill will allow him to even find a game plan perfect and execute it here to even nullify that type of approach from Lopes. Whether it means he shoots for more takedowns, which we know his submission defense is on point, so he shouldn't have too much to worry about there, or if he looks to throw with a little bit more heat in return, rather than just sticking the jab out there to try to deter Lopes from being as aggressive as I'm kind of expecting him to be here. I may not be as confident in Volkanovski as I was in the first fight, but I still think he ends up winning this fight. I'm hoping that he, just brings that game plan again. Jab, leg kick, takedowns, disrupt the rhythm of Lopes, and continue to rinse and repeat that. Knowing the durability of Lopes, I'd be surprised if Volkanovski gets the finish here. And I think if Lopes wins, it probably comes by knockout. I think we're actually going to see some love for Lopes come in during fight week. So if you're looking to play Volkanovski, I would wait until later on in fight week. Maybe it stays around this minus 145 range. At best, maybe we start to get closer to a pick'em like we did last time, as people still love Lopes and think that he can still knock Volkanovski out. But I'm going to go with the better minute winner, the better fighter overall. He may not be as dangerous in terms of getting a finish, but he's still the better fighter overall, just as he showed back in April when these two first threw down. So I'm going to go Alexander Volkanovski and still featherweight champion, Mr. Volkanovski. There you guys go. Full card breakdown for UFC 325 once again. Reminder, Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern, I'll be going live on the channel here to talk about the fights, talk about the predictions, give you guys more insight or answer any of the questions you guys have, and not to mention all the other great content that we got dropping on the channel. Appreciate the love as always. Hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys again tomorrow. Peace.